The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across the darkened fields, their glow reflecting off the metal of the old barn. The air was thick with the scent of freshly cut hay, and the distant sounds of crickets filled the night. But all of that was drowned out by the shrill voice of the woman standing beside the patrol car, her arms folded across her chest, her nose scrunched up as if the mere presence of the farm offended her existence. "I told you," Brenda said, her voice laced with triumph. "This place is a hazard to the community. The animals are dangerous, it's unsanitary, and I'm sure if you dig deep enough, you'll find something illegal going on here." The officer, a younger guy, looked unimpressed but still held a clipboard, pretending to take her claims seriously. I leaned against the fence, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a smirk I didn't bother to hide. This wasn't the first time she had tried something like this, but it was without a doubt her most desperate attempt yet. The officer cleared his throat. "Sir, we received a complaint about this property. Something about," he squinted at his notes, "aggressive animals, zoning violations, and an unauthorized structure?" Brenda's face lit up like she had just won the lottery. "Yes, that filthy barn. It's an eyesore, it stinks, and it's absolutely bringing down the property values of the neighborhood. It needs to go." I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. "You called 911 because of my barn." "That," she snapped, pointing at me like she was accusing me of arson, "is not just a barn. It's a breeding ground for disease, and I have had enough. My dog was nearly attacked by one of those monsters you keep on this so-called farm." I didn't even have to ask to know she was talking about Buttercup, my absolute menace of a goat, who had a reputation for bullying small dogs. I had warned Brenda before to keep her yappy little purse dog off my land, but she never listened. The officer sighed and shifted his weight, looking like he regretted taking this call. I could see the moment he realized Brenda wasn't going to let him leave without at least pretending to investigate something. "Look," I said, standing up straight. "I could explain to you why everything she's saying is nonsense, but honestly, I think it'd be easier if I just made a phone call." Brenda laughed sharply. "Oh, please. You can call whoever you want. I have every right to report this. The HOA has rules, and you are violating them." That was the moment I really started enjoying myself. Without another word, I pulled out my phone and dialed. The line rang once before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "Yeah. Hey, Uncle David," I said casually. "Mind coming over to my place? We got a situation." There was a pause, then a heavy sigh. "Tell me it's not Brenda again." "Oh, it's Brenda again." A chuckle. "I'll be there in 5. I hung up, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Brenda was still standing there, arms crossed, clearly waiting for some grand explanation. "You," she sneered, "think you can call your farmer friends and scare me into backing down? That won't work. The law is the law." I grinned. "Oh, I agree. That's why I called the sheriff." It took her a second to process what I had just said. Then her eyes widened slightly, her stance shifting ever so slightly. What do you mean, the sheriff?" "My uncle," I said, enjoying the way her face turned a lovely shade of pale. "Sheriff David Thompson. He's on his way." The officer looked relieved. Brenda looked like she had just swallowed a lemon whole. I let the silence stretch, watching as her bravado slowly crumbled under the weight of reality. It wasn't just that she had called the cops on something that wasn't a crime. It was that she had called the cops on the one person who had connections deeper than she could ever hope to have. It was the perfect moment to reflect on how we got here. I had inherited this farm from my grandpa, who had worked the land for decades. It sat right outside the HOA-controlled neighborhood, technically separate from their jurisdiction, but that hadn't stopped Brenda from making it her life's mission to act as if she had power over my property. From day one, she had come knocking, clipboard in hand, listing complaints about everything from the height of my fences to the smell of my compost pile. "You need to get rid of those animals," she had insisted the first time she came over. I had leaned against my porch railing, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Brenda, it's a farm. They're disruptive." "Again," I had said, gesturing to the wide-open fields, "farm." But logic had never been Brenda's strong suit. When she realized she couldn't find me into submission, she started escalating. First, it was passive-aggressive letters. Then, it was showing up with her little HOA minions, trying to intimidate me. When that didn't work, she started filing complaints, first with the city, then the health department, then animal control. Each time, I had shut her down. Each time, she had left angrier than before. And now, she had resorted to this. I watched as Brenda shifted from foot to foot, probably debating if she could still twist this in her favor. Before she could decide, a second patrol car pulled up, and out stepped a man built like a grizzly bear with a badge on his chest and a look of pure exhaustion on his face. Sheriff David Thompson took one glance at me, then at Brenda, then at the first officer on the scene. "Let me guess," he said. "She called 911 because of some made-up emergency?" Brenda straightened her spine, hands on her hips. "Sheriff, this property is a danger to the neighborhood. That man is violating the HOA rules." David held up a hand, cutting her off. "The HOA rules," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "do not apply to this land. But," and he continued louder this time, "you called 911 again over absolutely nothing." Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "This is a serious issue." Sheriff Thompson turned to the first officer. "What's the supposed crime?" The officer hesitated, glancing at his notes. "Aggressive livestock." I had to bite back a laugh. David exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. Then slowly, he turned back to Brenda, giving her the kind of look that made grown men nervous. "You do realize," he said, voice dangerously low, "that calling in a false emergency is a crime, right?" Brenda flinched, and for the first time since this whole ridiculous situation started, I saw actual fear in her eyes. I smiled. Oh, this was going to be fun. Brenda's face turned a shade of red that could rival a ripe tomato as she stood there, her jaw clenching so tight I thought her teeth might crack. She had expected this to go her way. She had been so sure that the simple act of dialing 911 and spinning her exaggerated tale would be enough to bring me down. But now, faced with my uncle, the sheriff no less, she was starting to realize she had severely miscalculated. I was just concerned for the safety of the neighborhood," she stammered, trying to regain her footing. "This place is a mess. There are animals roaming freely, and there is a horrible smell, and—" David held up a hand, silencing her instantly. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes as he glanced at me before turning back to Brenda. "Let me get this straight," he said, his voice calm, but carrying that unmistakable authority that only years of law enforcement could forge. "You called 911 because of a smell?" Brenda's mouth opened and closed, her confidence slipping further. "Well, it's more than that. There are dangerous animals here. I couldn't help myself." "You mean Buttercup?" At the mention of her name, my goat, my stubborn, fearless, and slightly evil goat, peeked out from behind the barn as if she knew we were talking about her. Brenda took an instinctive step back, glaring at the creature like she was some kind of rabid beast ready to pounce. "She attacked my dog," Brenda snapped, pointing an accusing finger. I shrugged. "Your dog came onto my land. Buttercup doesn't like uninvited guests." The younger officer, who had been quiet up until now, glanced between us, struggling to maintain his neutral expression. Sheriff David Thompson, however, had no such hesitation. He crossed his arms over his broad chest and let out a deep sigh. "Brenda," he said, his voice flat, "this is the third time you've called emergency services over something that is absolutely not an emergency." "It is an emergency," she shrieked. "He is violating the HOA rules. This entire place is a disaster, and it's bringing down the property values. He is running an unregulated operation, and I will not stand for it." David pinched the bridge of his nose. "For the last time, this farm is not under the jurisdiction of the HOA. The rules you and your little board enforce do not apply here. You have no authority over this property." Brenda's eyes twitched. "That can't be right. It has to fall under community regulations." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and opened the digital copy of my property deed. With a few taps, I pulled up the official document and turned the screen toward her. "See for yourself. This land was established outside of HOA control before your neighborhood even existed. My grandfather made sure of it." She snatched the phone from my hand, eyes darting over the screen, her face twisted with frustration as she read the words she so desperately wanted to prove wrong. She shoved the phone back at me with a huff. "That doesn't mean it's safe," she said, scrambling to recover. "It still needs to be properly inspected. There could be health violations. There could be." David cut her off again. "Brenda, you are not the law. You do not have the right to determine what is and isn't safe outside of HOA boundaries. Brenda's desperation was becoming more obvious. She had pushed every button she could think of, and none of them had worked. But she wasn't ready to give up yet. Not her. Not Brenda. This isn't fair, she spat. He's been harassing the HOA. He keeps ignoring the notices we send. He refuses to cooperate with community guidelines. And now you're just letting him get away with it. I grinned. You mean the fake notices? The ones that hold no legal weight? Yeah, I ignored those. You have been warned multiple times, she screeched. The HOA has the right to enforce neighborhood standards, and you are in violation of several of them. David arched a brow. Again, this land is not part of your HOA. Brenda's hands curled into fists at her sides, her entire body trembling with frustration. I don't care what your stupid technicalities say. This farm is disgusting, it's disruptive, and it needs to be shut down. I could see the moment David lost his patience. His posture straightened, his voice dropping into that dangerous calm that meant nothing good was about to come next. Brenda, he said slowly, do you understand the consequences of filing a false police report? Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. This wasn't false. It was, he cut in. You called emergency services under the claim that a crime was being committed. There is no crime here. That means you wasted police resources. That means you disrupted an officer's shift for no reason. And that means you are now looking at the possibility of legal repercussions. For the first time, genuine fear crept into Brenda's eyes. Wait, what are you saying? David pulled a small notepad from his pocket, flipping it open. I'm saying that this is now the third time you've misused emergency services. That makes it a pattern of behavior. And if I decide to take this further, that could mean a fine or possibly even charges for repeat offenses. The color drained from her face. You wouldn't. David stared at her, unmoving. Wouldn't I? Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats. Brenda's mouth opened and closed as she scrambled to find a way out of this. This isn't right, she said, voice quieter now. I was just trying to help the community. David sighed. Brenda, I'm going to give you one last chance. Leave now, and don't ever call 911 again unless there is an actual emergency. If you do, I will personally see to it that you face the full legal consequences. She clenched her jaw so tight that I thought she might shatter her own teeth. For a moment, I thought she might try to argue one last time. But then she turned on her heel, stomping away toward her car. Before she got in, she threw one last glare over her shoulder. This isn't over. I grinned. Oh, I hope it's not. I love our little chats. With an angry slam of her car door, she sped off, her tires kicking up gravel as she disappeared down the road. David turned to me with a tired expression. You enjoy pissing her off, don't you? I shrugged. It's a hobby. The younger officer let out a short laugh before clearing his throat. Well, if there's nothing else, I think we'll be heading out. David nodded. Yeah, I think we're done here. As they got back into their cars, David rolled down his window before pulling away. If she comes back, don't engage. Just call me. I gave him a lazy salute. Will do, Sheriff. With that, they drove off, leaving me standing there with the satisfaction of knowing that, for now, Brenda had been put in her place. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. People like her never knew when to quit, and I had a feeling she'd be back sooner rather than later. I just hoped that when she did, it would be just as entertaining as tonight had been. A week passed without a single sign of Brenda, which was unusual. Normally, she couldn't go more than a couple of days without making her presence known, whether it was through a new HOA complaint, a snarky letter, or just standing at the edge of my property pretending to take notes on some imaginary violations. The quiet was unsettling, and I knew it wasn't because she had given up. It was because she was planning something bigger. I wasn't wrong. It started with a letter. This time, not just another HOA warning, but an official-looking document claiming that the farm was under investigation for health and safety violations. There was even a fake city seal stamped at the bottom. The whole thing was laughable. I knew Brenda had no actual legal power to do anything, but she was getting desperate. I was still shaking my head at the ridiculousness of it when I heard a car pull up outside my gate. Looking up, I saw a familiar face stepping out, a guy named George, one of the few neighbors who actually had a decent head on his shoulders. Unlike most of the HOA board, George didn't buy into Brenda's nonsense. She's losing it, George said the moment he walked up. I smirked. You're going to have to be more specific. George let out a huff, glancing over his shoulder like he was making sure no one had followed him. She called an emergency HOA meeting last night. Full turnout. She spent an hour going off about how you're a threat to the community and that we need to take legal action. I leaned against the fence, crossing my arms. And George rubbed a hand down his face. She's got people actually believing her now. She showed up with some paperwork, claimed she had official complaints filed against your farm with the county. Even had some photos, zoomed-in shots of trash bins, animal droppings, and whatever else she could find to make this place look bad. I laughed. So she's playing dirty now. George shook his head. Worse. She convinced the HOA board to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on you. Says she wants to prove you're running an illegal operation. I blinked. Of all the stupid things Brenda had pulled, this was by far the most ridiculous. A private investigator? What did she think I was doing out here, running a smuggling ring for cows? George let out a short laugh, but quickly sobered. She's desperate, and she's good at stirring people up. The board is actually considering using HOA funds to push a lawsuit against you. I sighed, looking toward the road where Brenda's house sat just beyond the trees. She wasn't backing down, and if she was willing to spend HOA money to come after me, it meant she thought she had enough influence to pull it off. Well, I said, she's in for a surprise. George gave me a questioning look, but I just patted his shoulder and thanked him for the heads up. As soon as he left, I grabbed my phone and made a call. Uncle David picked up on the first ring. Knew you'd be calling sooner or later, he said, amusement in his voice. She's at it again, I said. Only this time, she's committing actual fraud. I explained the fake documents, the private investigator, and her plan to use HOA funds against me. David listened in silence before letting out a low chuckle. She just keeps making it easier for me, he said. I'll take care of it. A couple of hours later, I was in my barn feeding the animals when I heard the unmistakable sound of multiple cars pulling up to Brenda's house. Curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped outside, watching as two official-looking vehicles parked right in front of her place. Moments later, David stepped out of his patrol car, followed by another man in a suit. From the way Brenda stormed out onto her porch, it was clear she had not been expecting visitors. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could see the way Brenda's face twisted from anger to confusion to something dangerously close to panic. The man in the suit, who I assumed was from the county, handed her a thick stack of papers. Whatever they were showing her, it wasn't good news. She waved her arms, her mouth moving a mile a minute, but David simply stood there, arms crossed, unmoved by her usual theatrics. Then the shouting stopped. Brenda's shoulders tensed, her face paling as the man in the suit said something that made her stumble back a step. It was only then that I noticed some of the other HOA board members had come outside, watching from a distance. Some of them looked concerned, others looked nervous, but the most interesting thing was that none of them stepped in to defend Brenda. The standoff ended with Brenda storming back inside, slamming her door so hard that it rattled the windows. David and the county guy exchanged a few words before heading back to their cars. I didn't even have to ask what had just happened. David called me a few minutes later to confirm it. She's been officially reported for fraud, he said. That fake document she sent you? Illegal. Misusing HOA funds for personal vendettas? Also illegal. She's looking at some serious trouble. I grinned. Please tell me you have to audit the HOA now. David chuckled. Oh, not just me. The county is stepping in too. Turns out Brenda's been skimming HOA money for years. She's in deeper than she realizes. It was better than I could have hoped for. Not only was she finally getting a taste of real consequences, but her entire web of control was starting to unravel. The next few days were a thing of beauty. HOA members started talking, some angry that their money had been misused, others realizing that they had been blindly following Brenda without question. Whispers of a vote to remove her as president spread like wildfire. Brenda, of course, did everything in her power to fight back. She sent out emails claiming she was being wrongfully accused, called emergency HOA meetings to rally her supporters, and even went door to door trying to save face. But it was too late. By the end of the week, an official vote was held. I wasn't invited, of course, but George made sure to give me the play-by-play. She lost, he said, unable to hide his satisfaction. By a landslide. I leaned against my porch railing, sipping a beer. Couldn't have happened to a nicer person. She's furious, George added. Packed up and left town for a while. Guess she couldn't handle the humiliation. I smirked. Brenda wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully, but this time she didn't have a choice. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over the farm. No more fake violations, no more pointless harassing, no more Brenda. Of course, deep down, I knew this wasn't truly the end. People like her didn't just disappear. They waited, they plotted, and they came back with new tricks. But if she ever did, well, let's just say I'd be ready. The quiet that followed Brenda's downfall was almost unsettling. After months of her nonsense, waking up to a day without some new HOA complaint or ridiculous accusation felt strange. For the first time in a long while, I didn't have to worry about her minions showing up at my property, pretending they had the right to tell me what to do. The farm felt like it was finally my own again. The news of Brenda's forced removal as HOA president spread through the community faster than gossip at a church potluck. George had been kind enough to keep me updated, and according to him, it hadn't taken long for the HOA to completely turn on her. The moment they realized she had been misusing funds, manipulating rules, and filing false complaints, the support she once had evaporated. Without her iron grip over the board, people started talking, questioning the ridiculous policies she had enforced over the years. It was like a domino effect. The new HOA president, a guy named Martin who had mostly stayed quiet during Brenda's reign, took over with a very clear goal in mind: to undo the mess she had made. Within a week, the board met to overturn some of the most absurd rules, including the one about offensive smells that Brenda had tried to use against my farm. It turned out even some of the homeowners had been annoyed by the extreme restrictions Brenda had pushed on them. George told me that during their last meeting, someone had brought up the idea of refunding the fines Brenda had wrongly imposed over the years. That suggestion alone nearly caused an uproar, with some board members demanding an audit of everything she had done. The idea that Brenda might have to return thousands of dollars in unfairly issued fines made me laugh harder than I had in years. Despite all of this, I kept my distance. I had won, and there was no need to rub salt in the wound. Besides, I knew Brenda well enough to know that even though she was down, she wasn't out. People like her didn't just slink away quietly. They retreated, licked their wounds, and plotted their next move. Sure enough, she came back. It was nearly 2 weeks after she had lost the vote when I saw her car creeping down the road, stopping just before my property line. I had been outside fixing the fence, minding my own business, when I spotted her stepping out of the driver's seat. She looked different, less like the self-righteous HOA dictator she had once been, and more like a woman on the verge of snapping. She stood there for a moment, probably debating whether or not she should even try to talk to me. I let her stew in her own discomfort, watching as she shifted from foot to foot, eyes darting around as if expecting someone to come to her rescue. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter than I had ever heard it before. "This is your fault." I raised an eyebrow, wiping my hands on my jeans before crossing my arms. "Oh, and here I thought you did this all to yourself." Her nostrils flared, but the fight wasn't there anymore. "I just wanted to make the neighborhood better." I let out a short laugh. "Better for who? You?" "Because from what I heard, no one else was exactly thrilled with your leadership." She opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Instead, she let out a slow breath, her shoulders slumping. "You think this is funny, don't you?" I shrugged. "A little, yeah." She shot me a glare, but it didn't have the same fire she used to. For the first time, she actually looked tired, defeated. It was almost strange seeing her like that. "Do you know what they're doing now?" she asked bitterly. "They're talking about getting rid of half the rules I spent years putting in place. Just throwing them out like they meant nothing." I tilted my head. Maybe because they never should have been there in the first place. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she just shook her head, staring at the ground. "I gave everything to that HOA," she muttered. "I put in the time, the effort. I made sure people followed the rules. And this is how they repay me." I had to fight the urge to roll my eyes. "Brenda, you didn't run that HOA. You ran a dictatorship. There's a difference." She scoffed. "You wouldn't understand." "No," I said, "I probably wouldn't. Because I don't spend my time making other people miserable just to feel important." Her eyes flashed with something close to anger, but it was weak, like she didn't even have the energy to fight back anymore. "You don't get it," she said, her voice quieter now. I was the one keeping everything together. Without me, this neighborhood is going to fall apart. I gave her a long look, letting her words sink into the silence between us. Or maybe, I said after a moment, it's finally going to be a place where people actually want to live. She flinched, just barely, but I saw it. That small reaction told me everything I needed to know. She had spent so long convincing herself that she was the hero of this story, that she was the one keeping everything in order. But now that she was out of power, she was forced to see the truth. No one wanted her there. For a long moment, she just stood there, her face unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned on her heel and marched back to her car. She didn't slam the door like she usually did. She didn't peel out in some dramatic exit. She just got in, started the engine, and drove away. As I watched her disappear down the road, I let out a breath I hadn't even realized I was holding. That was the last time I ever saw Brenda. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful I'd ever had. Without her constantly stirring up problems, life on the farm became normal again. The HOA meetings became less about enforcing ridiculous rules and more about actual community improvements. People were happier, and for the first time, the neighborhood felt like a place where people could actually live without fear of fines or pointless restrictions. One day, George stopped by with a smirk on his face. "You'll love this," he said, handing me an envelope. I opened it, eyebrows raising at what was inside. A check signed by the new HOA board, refunding every single fine Brenda had ever tried to impose on me. "Figured you deserved it," George said. "Consider it a thank you gift for finally getting rid of her." I chuckled, tucking the check into my pocket. I didn't get rid of her. She did that to herself. George nodded. "Yeah, but you sure helped speed things along." I grinned, happy to be of service. As he drove off, I turned back toward the farm, taking in the sight of my land, my animals, my home. For the first time in a long time, there were no threats hanging over my head, no looming battles with Brenda, no pointless fights with the HOA. Just peace. And if Brenda ever thought about coming back, well, I'd be ready. Months passed, and life settled into a steady rhythm. Without Brenda constantly breathing down my neck, the farm thrived. The animals were healthier, the crops grew strong, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on my work without the looming threat of another HOA scheme. The neighborhood itself seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from everyone's shoulders. People who had once been too afraid to step out of line were now openly discussing changes to the HOA rules, questioning the policies Brenda had put in place. It was a new era, one where common sense actually stood a chance. I had almost started to believe that Brenda was gone for good. That was until the day I received an official-looking letter in the mail. The return address was unfamiliar, but the energy behind it was unmistakable. I tore it open, already knowing I wasn't going to like what I found. Inside was a notice stating that my property was under review for a possible zoning violation. Apparently, someone had submitted a complaint to the county, claiming that my farm was operating outside of the proper agricultural guidelines. The letter was vague, full of bureaucratic language, but the message was clear. Someone was trying to cause trouble for me again. I didn't need to guess who. Brenda may have been gone from the HOA, but she wasn't done with me. If she couldn't control the neighborhood through her old methods, she had clearly decided to take things to the next level. Sighing, I pulled out my phone and dialed the one person who would know exactly what to do. David answered on the first ring. "She's at it again, isn't she?" "She never learns," I muttered. "I just got a notice about a zoning violation. Apparently, my farm is being reviewed." David let out a low chuckle. "That woman's got more lives than a stray cat. All right, don't do anything yet. Let me make a few calls and see what's going on." I thanked him and hung up, my mind already racing with possibilities. Brenda had lost her position of power, but she was still trying to fight from the shadows. The fact that she had gone straight to the county meant she was desperate. She was grasping at straws, looking for any way to make my life difficult. By the next morning, David had updates. He showed up at the farm with a folder in hand, shaking his head as he walked up to my porch. "You're not going to believe this," he said, handing me the documents. I flipped through the pages, scanning the contents. The complaint against me was riddled with false accusations, claims that I was overbreeding livestock, improperly disposing of waste, and even accusations that my animals were causing environmental damage to the nearby properties. It was a laundry list of nonsense, all carefully crafted to make it seem like I was running some kind of illegal operation. She really went all out, I said, letting out a low whistle. David smirked. The best part? The county already dismissed most of it. Turns out they actually did a preliminary review before even contacting you. The only reason you got that letter is because some paper pusher followed protocol before checking the facts. So it's already dead in the water? I asked. For the most part, David said. But Brenda's not done. She's been going around town stirring people up again. I heard from a buddy of mine that she's trying to rally support from other property owners, getting them to file complaints too. I sighed. She really doesn't know when to quit. David leaned against the porch railing, arms crossed. She's hoping that if she throws enough dirt, something will stick. But here's the thing. People are tired of her. She burned too many bridges. The same board members who used to follow her orders are the ones pushing back now. That was a satisfying thought. Brenda had spent years manipulating the HOA, twisting rules, and bullying people into submission. Now, the very people she had once controlled were refusing to back her up. Still, I knew better than to assume she would give up easily. Brenda wasn't the type to accept defeat with grace. If she was already willing to take her fight beyond the HOA, it meant she was getting desperate, and desperate people did stupid things. It wasn't long before my suspicion was proven right. A few days later, I caught movement near the edge of my property. At first, I thought it was just a neighbor passing through, but something felt off. The way they moved, the way they lingered near the fence. It wasn't normal. I grabbed my binoculars and took a closer look. Sure enough, it was Brenda. She was standing just beyond my property line, holding a phone in front of her face, clearly recording something. Every so often, she would dramatically gesture toward my land as if she were narrating some grand expose. I let out a low laugh, shaking my head. Unbelievable. She hadn't learned. She was still trying to build a case, still looking for anything she could use against me. And from the looks of it, she was trying to create her own proof. I had two options. I could ignore her, let her waste her time standing there talking to her phone like a lunatic. Or I could have a little fun with it. I chose the latter. Without hesitation, I walked over to the fence, making sure she saw me coming. She stiffened but didn't move away. Instead, she lifted her chin, trying to maintain some illusion of control. Brenda, I said, keeping my voice casual. Enjoying the view? She narrowed her eyes. I'm documenting this. The people deserve to know what's going on here. I smirked. What exactly are you documenting? The grass? The perfectly legal farm operations. She huffed. You think you're untouchable, but I'm not giving up. I will prove that you're violating regulations. I nodded slowly, pretending to consider her words. Then, I pulled out my own phone and started recording her. She froze. What are you doing? Just documenting, I said, mimicking her tone. The people deserve to know what's going on here, after all. Her face twisted with frustration. You can't record me. I shrugged. Sure I can. Public road, remember? You're the one standing here filming me. Fair's fair. For a second, she looked like she wanted to argue, but then she snapped her mouth shut. Her face was a mixture of anger and uncertainty, and I knew she was realizing just how ridiculous she looked. Without another word, she turned on her heel and stormed off, her phone still clutched in her hand. I watched her go, a satisfied grin spreading across my face. She had lost. She knew it. And yet, she still couldn't let it go. But the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. She could make all the fake complaints she wanted and waste all her time recording nonsense. But no one was listening to her anymore. She had destroyed her own credibility. And as I stood there watching her disappear down the road, I knew one thing for certain. No matter what she tried next, no matter how desperate she got, she was never going to win. Not against me, not against the farm, and definitely not against the truth.